یک پیام از طرف امارت اسلامی به ملت پنجشیر است که شما بیاین از کوتا شوین، ملکی است یا غیر نظامی است، به همه شما
focus, let me reiterate, is that Afghan soil should not be used for terrorist activities of any kind, of anti-Indian activities, and we will try to focus on that element. Let's just treat the Doha meeting for what it is. It is just a meeting, and I think these are still very early days. I don't have further on that.
We are concerned with the promise, perspective of resurrection of terrorism there. Yes, we are same as you do. I believe it's too early to say. Too early to say. Is there any government officially available in Kabul now? Not yet.
Hello everyone, you're watching News Epicenter with me, Marya, Shakil. The Taliban's reign in Afghanistan is now supreme after the fall of the Panjshir resistance headed by Amrullah Saleh and Ahmad Shah Massoud. Taliban forces have invaded Panjshir and have consolidated their power in the country, with sources telling CNN News18 that government formation could take place in the next 24 hours. Pakistan has already made its stand clear when it comes to the new regime, with ISI chief Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid holding talks with the Taliban leaders in an attempt to play peacemaker between the different factions. More evidence, in fact, show that from air support to supplying arms, Pakistan is playing an active role in the takeover, even bombing the resistance forces' media headquarters. The United States forces have left Afghanistan and its people to the mercy of this emerging terror nexus. With the crackdown on the freedom of women, minorities and the media, the women of Afghanistan, those visuals on our television screens, are being thrown back to the dark ages with the shackles of the Sharia law, the latest being segregated classrooms at Kabul University. Journalists are being forced to toe the Taliban's line with the threat of force, with Taliban fighters training guns at them inside news studios. When the West invaded Afghanistan in 2001, the mission was to bring peace and democracy by overthrowing the Taliban. Now that barbarism is back on the streets of the war-torn nation. But the question before the globe is, in the absence of an armed response to the chaos in Afghanistan, what is the next move? The principle of human rights is supposed to be the guiding doctrine of foreign policy. But the pragmatism of diplomacy is a factor that cannot be ignored. The Taliban is in full control of Afghanistan, the terror nexus is taking shape, and Pakistan, Russia, Turkey and China are only looking at their strategic interests. While officially the global powers, including India, are sticking to saying early days when it comes to the diplomatic question, what is the road ahead? To answer that, we have Gautam Mukhopadhyay, former ambassador of India to Afghanistan. Ambassador M. Ashraf Hydari is ambassador of Afghanistan to Sri Lanka. Praveen Swami, group consulting editor, Network 18. Michael Kugelman, a South Asia expert at the Wilson Center. I'm going to begin with you, Michael. The presence of ISI chief Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid is very clear. He is in Kabul to meet the Taliban leadership, which is in advanced stage of government formation. He is there at the invitation of Taliban. There is enough evidence now to suggest the Taliban played that role. In fact, also helped, Pakistan helped Taliban crush the resistance in Panjshir. How should India be viewing these developments?
Well, there are many possible reasons why the ISI chief has been in Afghanistan, which could range from trying to mediate reported disputes within the Taliban to a variety of other factors. Who knows, and I'm not going to speculate. But certainly, this is not a surprise, is it? I mean, we knew that once the Taliban took over, that Pakistan was going to be in a very good strategic space. Having a friendly government in Kabul for the first time in nearly 20 years from Pakistan's perspective. And in terms of what India should be doing, I mean, I'll let your other guest respond to that in full, but I think that India has played things well to this point. It's been very cautious. It had that meeting between its ambassador in Qatar with the Taliban leader, I think mainly to discuss very core interests at this point, which clearly entail ensuring that any Indian nationals still in Afghanistan are safe and that those that want to leave can get out safely. And that makes perfect sense. I think it's necessary for there to be some engagement between the Indian government on the Taliban in order to address those core interests of India. But I would argue that if you look at this very broadly, India is in a very difficult spot right now, just because not only do you have the Taliban in control in Afghanistan, but as I think you had noted earlier, we're looking at the possibility of India's key rivals prepared to deepen their own role and their footprint in Afghanistan, not just Pakistan, but also China. I think that China may well be one of the first countries to formally recognize the Taliban government. And that puts India in a very difficult spot where it faces a question as to whether it's worth trying to engage more with the Taliban or just to sit back and wait and watch. I think it will take a cautious approach, which would make good sense. But clearly, at the end of the day, India has a lot of stakes in Afghanistan as it's such a major investor in terms of development projects over the years. And clearly, it needs to ensure that those assets, those investments, remain safe. I think that clearly is the key objective right now.
Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, the fact that ISI, got into this war, has indulged in a war crime of sort. The fact that it was playing out between two ethnic groups, between the Taliban and Panjshir, they went in and came out with open support for Taliban. The fact that Amrullah Saleh had said it clearly and categorically that Taliban is being run and aided by ISI. Now ISI is openly backing Taliban. I'm trying to understand, when this cocktail of sorts is playing out in our neighborhood, not immediate, but yes, then how should India be viewing it? Can we continue to say that there is some kind of, propaganda that is playing out? Because I'm looking at also the statement of Ahmad Shah Massoud. He says it very clearly that the international community was fully responsible for providing the Taliban with the opportunity that helped them gain political legitimacy and entitlement.
Yes, Marya, I entirely agree with that assessment. But, this is not just a war by Pakistan against Panjshir. This has actually been a 27-year war by Pakistan against Afghanistan, with an Afghan face and Pakistani brains and mind behind it. Pakistan has been involved particularly, in the first phase of the Taliban. The Taliban, we could not say, was a terrorist organization. It was an ultra-conservative religious militia pushed by Pakistan into Afghanistan. But in Taliban 2.0, which really started after the collapse of the Taliban in 2001, and actually grew in stages from 2003, 5 and onwards, as the United States took its eye off the Afghanistan ball and turned its attention to Iraq, there has been a progressive escalation of what we can call a very serious hybrid war that started off from indoctrination in refugee camps and madrassas in Pakistan, moved to indoctrination of preachers and mullahs in Afghanistan, a gradual infiltration, embedding and creation of shadow governments, a massive information war capitalizing on Afghan government and US mistakes, a psychological war using terrorism to wear down the Afghan people through a war of attrition, to a state of absolute resignation and defeat, which is what you saw in the kind of precipitous collapse of the ANDSF and the Afghan government. Psychological war in terms of deception and also military strategy and advice. The entire military strategy that started off from the north going to the west, surrounding Panjshir Valley from the north and from the south.
Yes.
And then eventually, cornering down to the cities. And finally, their practically physical fingerprint in Panjshir.
Yes.
So this is a very complex hybrid war, a kind of implementation of Sun Tzu's art of war, of winning a war without fighting, except that in Panjshir and in some other places they had to actually fight and they could not hold back their fingerprints anymore.
And then, Ambassador Hadri,
and it is accompanied by war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Absolutely.
That
there
the world
is
has
an
turned a blind eye to.
unimaginable, humanitarian crisis that is unfolding there as well. Ambassador Hadri, what really is the future of National Resistance Front of Afghanistan now? Because they are saying that they are very much present in all strategic positions across the valley to continue the fight. And they put out a statement saying that they are assuring the people of Afghanistan that the struggle against the Taliban and their partners will continue until justice and freedom prevails.
Well, just three things. First, they've been very clear on behalf of the Afghan people and the rest of the Afghan people, both those inside and others outside, demanding an inclusive and representative government. A condition if the Taliban meets, then this resistance would, slowly end as people really gain confidence and trust and see that meaningful inclusion would happen. And I think that needs to be demonstrated not just by statements and words by the Taliban, but actually in actions soon as this government is formed, that the right appointments would happen at the very top, and as well as working levels, including all Afghan voices, represent their views and aspirations and needs, and of course desire for an end to imposition of violence and conflict and control. That's one. And we know if this is not met, then resistance for freedom has no end. It will continue, especially in a context like Afghanistan, which even the Taliban themselves are quite aware of that, their leadership, that such resistance wouldn't end. Maybe they could take areas here and there, and they've already done so, and they've been victorious, and their state sponsor has been quite, celebrating at home and abroad, unfortunately. But it is Afghanistan. We have a long history. We have been through these things in the past. We have seen it recently over the past 40 years. But Afghans will rise and will reclaim our freedoms and our independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. Okay. And then third, of course, this is what the international community has been saying over the past 3 months, especially in the recent United Nations Security Council session, passed a resolution setting the conditions exactly as I pointed out to the Taliban. In order to gain any kind of recognition, they must deliver on formation of an inclusive and representative government, respecting human rights, women's rights, and the right in the achievements of the past 20 years. And here, I think India could and should have done a lot more. It's good to have such vocal media presenters like yourself, but when it comes to India having taken concrete action, an ambassador could speak to that. We've worked with them in the past on the implementation of the core objectives of the...
So how do you work on those lines? Praveen Swami, with the battle for Panjshir going on, reports are also coming in of Taliban Haqqani power tussle. That has also surfaced, indicating that the Taliban's rise to power will not be as smooth as it was thought, seeing its lightning advances, one would say, in Afghanistan. Amrullah Saleh says that he's very much there, he may be underground. And Ahmad Shah Massoud has already issued a statement. Would you say, while this power tussle plays out, the international community quite literally is a mute spectator?
Well, to the first part, I think this battle in Panjshir will go on for a while. I think there's a little bit of a misconception about the configuration over there. There's a road through the valley on which most of the towns lie, but then there are multiple other valleys heading out into the mountains. And from past experience, especially that of the Soviet Union, each time there were Soviet attacks on the Panjshir insurgents, they would step back into these valleys, wait it out, come back. So the Soviet Union had 9 military victories, none of which was very durable, because the insurgents came back each time. And I suspect the Taliban are going to have the same problem. As for the power struggles within the Taliban, they're quite manifest. The effort seems to be to get Maulvi Hassan, who is a sort of consensus figure, no threat to either of the factions, on board as the next sort of ruler of Afghanistan. But this will be a fairly tenuous arrangement. It will be sort of papering over the cracks rather than keeping them, building any durable solution. As for the world standing and watching by, sadly, I think that's what the reality is going to be. For all this talk of great, which there's great optimism about in Pakistan, about enormous Chinese and Russian investment flowing in my view, this is an utter fantasy. The Chinese are not going to fling vast amounts of development funding into Afghanistan because they know the situation is going to be unsettled for the foreseeable future, and they have no interest in making military commitments there. There may be formal diplomatic recognition, but the idea that some vast wealth is going to flow is at some distance from reality. Sadly, the people of Afghanistan will suffer the consequences of this Pakistani proxy war, which has degraded the little chance Afghanistan had built up over these last 20 years.
Yes, so if
to
anything,
see some meaningful progress.
The indication is that this is the way it will be. But then, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, no engagement would also mean abandonment of people, of civilian population, who need support. I've been reading some reports which are suggesting that the World Food Programme says that 1 in 3 Afghans are already going hungry as the nation faces its worst drought in 30 years. There are challenges at multiple levels. So the question about foreign aid and others will surface at this particular point while we look at those images also emerging from Kabul University, and I'll ask the producer to put that on the television screens, where there is a clear segregation, a parda between male and female students. So for all the talks that they will ensure that women get their due, they get their say in government, that is something that they are not reflecting in their actions.
Yeah. Thank you again. In fact, the United Nations has an opportunity to, to insist on a kind of humanitarian window to reach aid, to reach humanitarian assistance to the very large numbers of Afghans who desperately require it. We are talking about very large numbers of internally displaced people, very large numbers of refugees that are, going to settle in neighboring countries, and all forms of humanitarian assistance, including the right to travel and the right to leave the country, not to forget. And I feel that, this can be done with a minimal kind of engagement. There is no certainty that the Taliban would even be able to deliver those humanitarian aid and services, and that they would be able to deliver it impartially. They might deliver it to populations that they like. In 2002, India actually donated 1 million tons of wheat. The first 3 or 4 Tata trucks that took it across overland to Afghanistan actually attracted rather too much attention in Pakistan for the Pakistani army to countenance. So after that 1 million tons of wheat was actually donated to the WFP, which converted it into high protein biscuits, which were used for schools and children all over Afghanistan. And these biscuits reached every corner of Afghanistan with the WFP and Indian flag. This is the kind of people-to-people initiative. This is the kind of humanitarian initiative. This is the kind of, exactly the gestures and
but
the
Ambassador, will
Taliban
be open to such an idea, or do you think that they'll be very clear about the rules of engagement?
Well, if they don't,
because it's evident what happened at the United Nations Security Council with China and Russia both abstaining from that resolution, and they were in fact also talking about diluted language in its pressure, trying to ease pressure on Taliban. So they are very clear about how it should be. Their road ahead is decided.
Exactly, but they should be exposed. I mean, I think that if Taliban actually rejects this kind of humanitarian assistance, so the price will be paid by the Afghan people, and the Afghan people will hold them responsible. Similarly, if China and Russia actually try to obstruct in any way, a certain amount of, call it conditionality, at least leverage that we should give to the United Nations to do this. And if we use the UN specialized agencies to do this, then the responsibility and onus on us to actually compromise on basically what I would call a minimal engagement for people-to-people relations to continue in spite of the uncertainty in that case, Michael, about an inclusive government.
How long can the world continue to wait and watch and let the Taliban form the government? This is their second attempt, which seems to be failing.
Well, I mean, I don't think the world is waiting, so to speak. As was noted before, there are plans to have a major aid conference sponsored by the UN a week from today on how to gather resources for humanitarian assistance. But certainly, I think if you look here in Washington, where I am, the administration is really in a process of disengagement from Afghanistan. We know that the withdrawal is complete. And now it's transitioning strategically onto other issues, unfortunately. But the U.S. will have some narrowly focused interests in Afghanistan in the coming weeks, which will include trying to contribute to bringing about this international campaign to bring humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. The U.S. will be engaging with the Taliban, not on official formal levels because it's not recognizing the Taliban government. It will be engaging with the Taliban on issues like ensuring that those Americans still in Afghanistan that want to leave can actually leave. And the U.S. will also be discussing with the Taliban, I'm sure, the necessity of allowing safe transport of humanitarian assistance and for the Taliban not to get in the way of that. And I really don't think that the Taliban will cause a problem in that regard. It's really keen on maintaining its international legitimacy and on generating domestic legitimacy. And so it wouldn't benefit by knowingly and clearly preventing humanitarian assistance from entering the country. So I don't think it'll be a problem in that regard. But the issue is getting the assistance. There's so much that's needed. As we know, there's so much need in Afghanistan now. And we'll have to see if this aid conference next year is successful in generating the types of the amount of funding and resources that are needed, given the huge extent of the need in Afghanistan right now.
Ambassador Hadri, let me give you the final words here. The fact that Taliban has crushed dissent and resistance, of course, that played out in Panjshir, and the fear also is of a possible civil war, because I was looking at the statement that was made by one of the generals, Mark Milley, who has told that there is a very good probability of a broader civil war which will lead to the reconstitution of Al-Qaeda or a growth of ISIS.
Well, the growth of ISIS has already happened. Al-Qaeda is already in Afghanistan and has been emboldened. So have ETIM, East Turkestan Islamic Movement, as well as Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, also sheltered by the Taliban in the northeast of Afghanistan, where they actually fought alongside the Taliban to capture the northeastern provinces. What is really important at this point is really, let's focus back on the humanitarian crisis. The Taliban, of course, have already welcomed this. Their state sponsor have done that simply because both of them have systematically destroyed Afghanistan state institutions, both at the local level and as well as in center. And Afghanistan's economy has completely collapsed over the past a couple of weeks, Afghans being unable to even withdraw their hard-won savings, and they've been given ration of about $200 to support extended families. So we're talking about 35+ million people of Afghans in need of urgent assistance. So I think it's an opportunity for the international community to deliver, and the conference on humanitarian in Geneva.
Ambassador Hadri, I've really come to the end of this discussion. Of course, this will be continuing with you on another bulletin. Thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, Praveen Swami and Michael Kugelman. Of course, thank you so much to the viewers as well. This is one discussion that will be continuing because the story in Afghanistan is still unfolding. That's all from me. Thanks so much for watching.